Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to talk about From Helmand to the New Cold War, hard lessons in leadership. And I'm delighted to have Nick on the podcast. Nick, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Great to be here.
Yeah, and let me just tell you a bit about Lieutenant General Sir Nick Borton, a recent retired three-star British Army officer, former commando of NATO's Allied Rapid Reaction Corps. Commissioned into the Royal Helmand Fusiliers, served in UK, Germany, Belize, Bosnia, Brunei, Cyprus, Iraq, and Afghanistan. At the age of 43, he did airborne training like me, but I was much younger and I could manage it, to then pass and be able to command 16 Air Assault Brigade. He was the GOC of 3rd UK Division, worked in the Permanent Joint Headquarters, and just some fascinating roles. And now he's a NATO Senior Mentor. He's has a portfolio of strategic advisory and board business roles with RUSI and RAND. So, Nick, that's quite a lot. Are you enjoying yourself now?
Yeah, it's great actually. I mean, it's a big thing to leave the army after 35 or 37 years and having done one career for the first part of, or the majority part of your life, and everyone adapts to it differently. I was, if I'm honest, a bit worried about leaving, and the first day I didn't have a uniform on. But actually, it's great, and I haven't looked back, and I'm very busy and found lots of useful and valuable things to do. And everyone says, "Oh, I miss the people." Well, I still see the people, and I still work with the people, and I'm still engaged with all the veterans from my regiment, and so I don't miss the people because I still see them. So no, it's all good.
And it was lovely the change from a big role to then being out on your own. In the days when presidents were modest in America, there was one of them. I think it was George Bush, one of the Bushes, and he went, "Yeah, when I left, being president, what was I doing the next day?" He said, "I was collecting dog shit in the garden and putting the suitcases up in the loft." And I thought that was a nice down to earth. And someone who left the services in a senior role like you said that. It was just a bit of a wake up call and a good, humbling experience to remember that you actually had to climb into the front of the car rather than the back seats of the car and drive yourself. So, anyway, lovely having you on the podcast, Nick. The whole podcast is really about inspiring leaders and your peers of the 400 or more who've been on already, and part of the book, The CEO's Compass: How to Navigate Your Team Through Turbulent Times, with all the profits going to the Inspiring Leadership Foundation, helping the victims of violence against women and girls and those who are less fortunate in society.
Very good.
The lovely thing that people like about them, the humility, the humanity, and humor. And this is why you were recommended to come on the podcast. I don't take people unless someone else has said they're inspiring, and you were definitely recommended. Let's have a talk about the why, what I call the purpose quotient on the Inspiring Leadership Compass. Why have you done what you've done, and why are you doing what you're doing now? What's the big why for you?
Um, I'm not sure at the time when I sort of embarked on this journey, I gave it much thought. But I am one of those funny people who just always wanted to be a soldier. It's something I always wanted to do since my earliest consciousness, and it was my sort of boyhood dream to command a bunch of jocks and go on operations. And I was just very lucky to sort of live my boyhood dream throughout my career. And I suppose, like everybody in my generation, we also hit a very exciting, interesting, busy, full time of operational soldiering around the world, which was great. But it's just something I always wanted to do. And, I joined my sort of family regiment of, the Scottish Infantry, the Royal Highland Fusiliers, and that's the battalion I served with my whole career. And, it became my absolute professional home and my family's home in many ways, where all my greatest friends are and were. And so I never sort of gave it that much thought when I was young. I just knew I wanted to do this. And once I started, I just stuck at it. And then comes a time when your army career comes to an end and you realize it's not the be all and end all and there's life after the army. And you can reinvent yourself or at least adapt yourself into a new endeavor and still add value.
Yeah, and Royal Highland Fusiliers and indeed Scottish regiments. I'm a lover of history and novels going back to sort of battles in India and things. And it was always the Scottish infantry that were always the one that did the toughest jobs and had some of the hardest, difficult soldiers to
Absolutely right.
lead.
You're right.
And I was thinking of a rogue officer I remembered. Was it Davy Kirk? Was he in your regiment?
Davy Kirk was absolutely in my regiment.
Yeah,
You might say that I couldn't possibly comment, but I know Davy
yeah.
very well. Very good soldier. Very good
Yeah,
soldier.
yeah, and he was. We were at Junior Division of Staff College, and he was always up to roguish things, which was great fun. But I must take my hat off to you. Doing P Company at 43, I don't know many leaders that I know who could go through that physical and verbal abuse. What was your big lesson from that?
So just to clarify, I was exempted P Company because I was 43. So I was told I had to do it. What I had to do was pass the parachute course at number one parachute school.
That is tough too. That is very
So
tough.
I walked at, I said, P Company, really? And the chief of the general staff, luckily, who was Peter Wall, who's a paratrooper engineer, and said, don't be ridiculous. He's going to be the brigade commander. We'll just break him and have to find somebody else. But I
Yeah.
had to do the parachute course. I mean, that in itself, as with a parachute, reserve, container, rifle, ammunition, just getting on the aircraft at age 43 was, I've never done anything like that in my life. And of course, the other thing is it was me and, 60, 19-year-old paratroopers straight out of Catterick
Yes.
who were all dying to throw themselves out of the aircraft. And I think of plenty of other things I wanted to do other than throw myself out of the aircraft at age 43. And the first time I jumped, I hit the ground like an absolute
Well,
bag of
that
spam.
was the thing I was going to say. When you land, I remember every time I landed, I'd be checking my legs and my arms. Are they broken? No, everything's okay. But
Well, young para captain broke his back on our first jump, which really cheered everybody up, I can tell you.
boy.
Anyway, that part of my life, I'm glad to say, is in the past now, but
Yeah.
I don't regret it. And 16, gave me the opportunity to command 16 Brigade, which isn't something I necessarily anticipated in my future. And it was absolutely brilliant fun, superb organisation of deeply, deeply motivated people, absolutely focused on achieving their end, whatever it might be. And they were an absolute privilege to command.
No, wonderful job. And also, congratulations. Those CEOs listening to this will not know what the DSO really means, but the Distinguished Service Order is a really high honor for someone who's actually shown grit and determination and leadership in battle. That was when you were in Helmand, was that right?
Yeah, when I was the commanding officer of 2nd Battalion, the Royal Regiment of Scotland, two Scots, in 2008, back in the good old days, when we were part of 16 Brigade, which is kind of where the 16 Brigade link started. And yeah, I had an unusual tour, or an interesting tour, I guess, a busy tour. But yeah, no, the DSO means, if I'm honest in my heart, means that probably more to me than, all the other
I think so.
gold
I think so.
medals.
Yeah, I mean,
special thing.
I mean, you also got the Knight Commander of the Order of the Bath, which is again very impressive. But what was it that the battalion did that they, that was so? If you talk about the battalion and the way the soldiers were, and what you did in Helmand, that you're particularly proud of?
I think, and I guess it comes as neatly round to the subject at hand, but when you go on these things and you take a young bunch of soldiers, in my case, Central Belts, Scotsmen, largely Glaswegians, and Ayrshire, a handful of Fijians, and there's lots of PlayStation generation. They won't be able to hack it. It'll be too hard. And we went up there, and I was in Musakala for most of it, which some of your listeners will be familiar with in the sort of northern bit of the Helmand Valley. And every day, those young soldiers went out the front gate and took the fight to the enemy. And they never once complained, and they always had a smile on their face. All they wanted to do is just get in a fight and win and, do their thing and earn medals and all the rest of it. And in my mind, because it's not uncontroversial, the Afghanistan campaign, in the same way as the Iraq campaign. If anything, the Iraq campaign probably more controversial, I suppose. And given that people are getting killed and hurt every day, or not every day, but on a regular basis across the whole of the operation, I had sort of, like all commanding officers, prepared myself to have that conversation with my soldiers, particularly when somebody got hurt, to say, "Why are we doing it, sir? It's a waste of time. What are we here for? What's it all for?" And prepared myself to have that discussion with my soldiers and motivate them, and all part of the leadership challenge. They never once asked me why they're here. They just wanted to know that I had a good plan that wasn't going to get them all killed, and that they had the support, direction, and backup that they needed. And then they just got on with it because they're soldiers, and that's what you're paid to do, and that's what you sign up for. It's, as the old saying goes, if you can't take a joke, you shouldn't have joined. So it was a hugely rewarding experience, and I think again, everyone has a different experience, of course. And of course, there were some long, slow, difficult nights in Helmand that I wouldn't want to repeat. But overall, it was a hugely rewarding. It was the professional experience of my career. That's what I joined to do. And I don't know a single person that came to Helmand with me that if I said who's coming back tomorrow, wouldn't put the hand up and come back tomorrow. Every single veteran I know, everybody who served in my battalion, would all go back tomorrow if you asked us. So it wasn't an it was a very rewarding, uplifting experience overall.
And a certain president who'll remain nameless said that you guys were a little bit back from the front line. What's your answer to that one?
I refuse to be riled or, you know, incensed about that. I can see why it would deeply offend the families and mums of the guys we left behind, but I refuse to. It's just nonsense. Just everyone knows it's nonsense. It's the ramblings of somebody who doesn't need to be taken seriously. So I refuse to let that, as Noel Coward used to say, rise above it.
Exactly. Well, look, nice to hear that, Nick. And while we're on that topic, I mean, we live. I think. I mean, my book is called "How to Navigate Your Team Through Turbulent Times," and you are an advisor and doing very strategic and board and business roles. What is your advice about how people should cope with these particularly turbulent times? I mean, I'm slightly older and smellier than you, but I think this is the most unstable time I've known in my lifetime. What's your view of what's going on with NATO, with the breakdown of the world order, with Mark Carney's superb speech? I thought he really called it. What's your particular viewpoint?
Well, I mean, I think all of those things are right. And, as an aside, I think the title of your book about leading in turbulent times is very apposite because leadership is about leading when times are tough. It's not about when things are easy. When things are easy, dead straightforward, everyone gets on with it, they know what they're doing, and there's no challenges. The whole point of leadership is it gets teams through difficult periods to achieve high endeavors or difficult endeavors against the odds. That's the essence of good leadership. So I think that's right. In terms of the situation, no question that we're in a very difficult, challenging period, and however way or in whichever way the war in Ukraine ends, as it will at some point, probably not immediately, but at some point, we all have to reconcile ourselves that the future security architecture that we've enjoyed for the last 80 years in Europe is going to be over for a generation now. So we are definitely in more unstable times, and the current US administration may be brilliantly about to solve a whole range of problems, like it has done in Gaza for a while, or it may be about to make the whole things worse. Who knows? But either way, it's a very uncertain time. Of course, it's not the first time. It's just that your and my generation grew up in a very happy, stable period. Our grandparents, my grandfather served in two world wars, and so they would say that. It's just history coming around full circle again. But yeah, very challenging times, and resilience and holding one's faith, I think, is the key, and holding on to those things that we believe are true and right and good.
Yeah, and I think this is where integrity and all that you and I were brought up with the values at Sandhurst and then how we live them, is more important than ever. And people are going, "Oh no, don't worry about it. Just get what you can for your own. Line your pockets, do some Bitcoin, sell a bit of this, sell a bit of that. Get people to pay you for decisions you make." And I think it's something like 90% of the world's countries are corrupt, where you feed your family from where you work, which is what we're seeing with certain presidents just feeding his own family in very large dollar bills. Um, so so when you've got people who do have integrity, that's really wonderful to see. Knowing what you know about the world and its dysfunction at the moment and the troubles brewing and all your knowledge of NATO, what would be your advice to CEOs of businesses listening about how they should navigate their teams through turbulent times? Because you do advise a number of different businesses, but if there was like three things you'd give them some advice about how to cope with what's going on at the moment, what anything comes to mind? It's a bit difficult
Yeah, I
question.
think off the top of my head, three things would be: firstly, make a plan. Too many businesses, if you took the CEO aside or any of the SLT aside, and they'd say, "Yeah, gosh, really difficult times and really uncertain," and then they just go back to work because the human condition is inclined to take the easiest path and to stick to what you know and what's comfortable. So thing one is make a plan, accept the world that we're in, and make a plan to deal with it. Have contingency plans, have backup plans. And then linked to that, the second thing is being agile or adaptable. And agility is a sort of much thrown around world in defence, particularly in defence industry. But really, what we're talking about is the flexibility to respond to rapidly changing events without it throwing you off course. All of these things, of course, are the sort of essence of strategy making. But the ability to not be absolutely committed to one path and not move off it. And one of the things I've learned, over many years of soldiering at different levels and different places is, it's fight the enemy, not the plan, because the plan never works out how you think. So, deal with the circumstances you're confronted with. Don't be absolutely wedded. Have a plan. Do the planning. Planning is very important, but don't then be wedded to that plan. The final thing is hold your nerve, which is critical. And a great lesson I learned. I remember in Helmand, I had a wonderful 2IC who's still a great friend, Battalion 2IC. And, because it is all on you as a commanding officer, as in the same way that I see with the CEOs I work with, there's an enormous amount, people's mortgages and livelihoods and, businesses going bust and all the rest of it was all on the CEO. So it's a lot of weight. And, when we used to agonize about whether the Taliban had got a suicide bomber that was going to rush the front gate, or whether they'd got a whole new bunch of rockets to fire at the base, or whatever it might be. And you sort of lie awake at night worrying about these things. The 2IC just say, hold your nerve, sir, hold your nerve, keep the faith. And I think holding a nerve in turbulent times is an absolutely key element of leadership.
Yeah, I think great wisdom there. And mission command and trust is something that I find often missing in businesses. How would you advise CEOs the importance of trust within the team and mission command? What would be your advice?
Really interesting subject, and I think it's on a sliding scale. And of course, much discussion about it over one's military career at different levels. Of course, mission command, the term that we use as soldiers, is inherently a tactical tool for winning battles. It's not a management tool. It's for you're at battle, you're in a battle, and you lose comms, or the commander gets killed, or whatever it is. Have you given sufficient intent and guidance and freedom of action to your subordinates to carry on with the mission because they understand it in the absence of orders or in the absence of radio communications? It's a subtly different thing to approaching management with mission command or empowerment, etc. And of course, I think it was Lenin who said, trust is good, control is better. And I remember being taught as a young officer by the 2IC, who was my cousin, who used to say, if it's not checked, it's not done. Armory checks, ammunition checks, cash and bank checks, cash flow checks, accountancy returns, inventories of expensive spare parts in the production unit. These are all things that need to be checked. But if you run an organization all on, I agree with that comment, by the way. If you run an organization entirely on control, which is normally a manifestation of lack of confidence, actually, in the leader, then what you do is suppress young, talented people's desire, ambition, and growth. And what I've discovered is, it's worth taking a bit of risk on, because nothing disempowers people by just being told what to do, even if what you're telling them is right. I remember learning when I was in MOD, actually, it was a civil servant on one of these 360 things. He said, the trouble is, you get to the answer well before the staff have briefed you. Well, that's no surprise, because I've been doing it longer than everybody else. That's why I was the brigadier, because I've been doing it longer and got more experience. So, of course, in my mind, I immediately came to the solution quickly. And this person said to me, don't always rush to the solution, because it's very disheartening for everybody who's done the work. Of course, I've been in that position as well. Much better to hold your tongue and wait to the end of the brief, a suggestion or whatever it is, and then say to everybody, what do you think we should do? They'll look at you as a leader. So instead of immediately rushing to, right team, here's a challenge, let's fix it, let's do this, I say to people, particularly to get higher up, say to the div staff, great, well, that looks a challenge. What are we going to do about that then, everybody? And then they go, oh, he wants us to have a think about it. Now, in your mind, you might know what the solution is, but don't rush to tell them, because it's disheartening. Let them get to it. And if you've trained them properly, then 80% chances it's near enough like yours, or in every many situations, it'd be much better
Yeah.
than the solution you came up with. So A grade leaders surround themselves with A grade people. B grade leaders surround themselves with C grade people.
Yeah, and I think this is a really good point, and I'm very fortunate to run lots of offsites for different CEOs and their top teams around the world. It's something that I really get a buzz from it, and just come back from doing one with a big, well-known supermarket chain CEO and his team, and shortly going to Germany to do one with the chief HR officer and all their leadership team. And issues that tend to be among the team is they want collaboration. They want to work as a first team. They often call this thing, this is your first team. The one you report up into is your first team, and you think at that level. So if you're back to our days in a battalion, if you're a company commander, the tendency is look after your company, but actually you need them to think like the commanding officer. What's best thing for the whole battalion? And people don't tend to do that. They tend to retrench into their function, look after their own team, and yet you need this collaboration between people. But some go, no, I'm not gonna help out here. My team wants this. How do you encourage people to think about what they call enterprise wide, or the bigger picture, so they're doing what's good for the whole organization rather than the bit they're actually paid to lead?
It's a very important point, and if I think about you mentioned 16 brigade, I think back to I think 16 commanding officers or 12 commanding officers in the brigade, all of whom were high quality. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been commanding officers in 16 brigade. They were
That's a
all
lot, by
brilliant.
the way. That's a lot of commanding officers.
It's a big brigade because of its role and sort of independence, I suppose. It's a lot of report writing. I'll tell you that for free. So they were all brilliant, and they could all run their battalions superbly well, and all their soldiers loved them and thought they were great and all the rest of it. The really good ones cracked commanding their battalion by morning coffee and spend the rest of the day helping me run the brigade. The less capable ones who didn't go further or as far did a brilliant job of running their battalion just for the sake of their battalion and couldn't see beyond their own front gates. And if they were asked, "Oh, we need you. Can you come and give us a hand with this? For come and help out another battalion on this task," or last minute, we need a bunch of guys to come and help this. They say, "Oh no, that will interrupt my plan. That will undermine my ability to train, my companies because I'm helping somebody else out." So those are the people who didn't go as far as the people with a bit more vision and capacity to always think. And I think everyone's got a boss pretty much, unless I suppose you're the CEO of a very independent company, in which case you've got shareholders. But you know, thinking about life through the lens of the people above you, or your clients, or your customers, rather than through your own lens, is really important. And that's why teamwork, or team building, or just reminding everybody about how teams work. And there's a good little military analogy of it. I once learned, which is, I can't remember which academic study it was, but if you take an 8-man team or woman team in combat, a rifle section, say in a battle, as long as everybody in that section remains committed to the section winning its battle, accepting that one or two of them might lose their lives, but remain committed overall to the success of the team, then the section will win the battle, and actually they've got more chance of surviving and they'll have won. The minute, and this happens in combat, the minute those individuals make a mental decision that their own interests are more important than that of the section or the platoon or the company or the division or the corps, then that unity of effort and those bonds break down and people start fighting for themselves or they run away, the whole breaks down and the section will lose the battle. So it's about putting the organization first, you are close behind it, but in order to achieve success, which you benefit from in the long run anyway.
Yeah, and time and again on these offsites, there is a lack of mutual trust that needs to be built up. They'll say fine words, but actually their actions are self-protection, looking after their own team, not sharing resources, um, political wranglings to try and get ready for promotion to another job. And ego gets in the way of what is the right thing for the customer, the right thing for colleagues. Um, of course, you've got some really good people among all this who will think one up two up, what's my part in the plan? But too often, self-service, what's in it for me? How am I going to get a bonus? What's in my best interest does come to the fore. And sometimes they're allowed to get away with it if they're performing well in their business. Or a classic one, when I work with an investment bank, the traders go, we're the front office, we make all the money. These guys in the back office, the support functions, they're not as good as us. We are superior. And of course, you've seen this in the military. When I served in the Royal Signals and then transferred, having served with the Scots Guards, 2nd Battalion, just after the Falklands War as a platoon commander, and then joined the Green Howards later, that there was this more than, less than. Any views that you have in business?
I think that's right. And I think the challenge for CEOs is, the advantage we have in the military is everyone's been trained. So every time we go and do something, that everybody's been trained to do their job to a high standard. Otherwise, they wouldn't be there. So you can afford to delegate, empower, use mission command, knowing that you've trained your team and you don't go on operations without having trained with them. CEOs don't often have that luxury. And I find often CEOs end up doing too much, too far down, rather than looking up and out, vision, strategy, high level stakeholder engagement, because they're forced to get down into the dirty because they don't necessarily have the backup below them, not because people are bad or malign or lazy occasionally, but not very rarely. The issue is that they lack confidence or aren't properly trained. And the reason is because in business, you're on operations all the time, you're doing it all the time. It's very hard to the sort of days you're talking about to carve out executive away days or say to people, take 6 months off and go and do an MBA or an engineering management course or whatever it might be. So the challenge is that balance between everyday work and trying to grow your team and train them to the point where you can trust them to get on with it so you can do the up and out. And the bit about, it's also a very good point you make about making sure everybody feels part of the team. I think, the good thing about the military, notwithstanding cat badge rivalry, is that, all anyone cares about is, are you here to help and are you any good? And, if those two questions are in the affirmative, then great, we're all used to gluing teams together on operations from different cat badges. But, everyone contributes. There's that great story about Kennedy, after he announced in 1960 that, the Americans would go to the moon before the end of the decade. We choose to do it not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And he set NASA the task. So one day he went to visit NASA to see how they were getting on with this extraordinarily ambitious project to put a man on the moon, which, of course, as we know, they did. And he was walking down the corridor and he met some old chap pushing a mop up and down the corridor. So Kennedy stopped to talk to him and said, "Hello, chap." He said, "What are you doing?" The chap put his mop down, turned to him and said, "Mr. President, I'm helping put a man on the moon." Just as much a team as everybody else. So good line.
It is a good line. And I think this, are you here to help and are you any good? Often in business, people are a bit shocked to spend, I don't know, £12,000 on someone's development or coaching or whatever it might be for a year. But if you think education's expensive, try the cost of ignorance. And a lot of the time, people are promoted into roles. There is no additional training. They don't know what good is or what it looks like. Their role models that they've had might be bullies or a bit toxic, the JFDI kind of approach, or fear that makes them do it. And so they struggle, and there's not much help for them. So I really get the point you make. And when you look at how much training you had, they would have spent at least 500 to 700,000 pounds training you, if not more, Nick, over your 37 years career. But if you spend 10 grand on someone in a business, they go, that's a lot of money. What's your view?
Yeah, I think that therein lies the challenge, and it's down to businesses to what degree they grow. I think particularly I see with defence industry at the moment, it's growing like topsy because we're all for all the right reasons in the tragic circumstances we're in, frantically rearming the West and NATO to deal with the coming threats. So there's a lot of growth, there's a lot of recruitment, there's a lot of expansion. There is a lot of money in defence now, but as you rightly say, it's shareholders or investors' money that people don't necessarily want to see or don't see the initial benefits. And that's my point about do the planning, make a plan. Accept the plan will change, but do the planning and work out who's doing what and what do they need, to do that. You wouldn't ask someone to build a fighter jet without giving them the correct tools of the job to do it. You need to be giving everybody the mental tools and the sort of soft skills and the management skills to be able to do what they need to do as well.
Yeah, well, as you were speaking there about the defence businesses you're working with and rearming and preparing for what's coming, we've had some illustrious colleagues of yours who've come on before this, like Rupert Smith and Richard Sharif and Richard Dannett and the former CDS. What do you see happening? I mean, we've got Ukraine, we've got Russia in this existential war, which is actually NATO versus Russia by another means. We've got the Baltic states under threat, Finland under threat, Poland worried. 10 years from now, what's your estimate of what will have happened in those 10 years?
I think the only thing I'd pick up on what you said is, quite careful not to say that NATO's fighting Russia, because that's Putin's narrative. That's how Putin is selling this to his much put upon and brainwashed people. And I think he probably in his own mind believes it, because he's been telling himself it for so long, that it's an existential battle with NATO. And we're quite clear to say that NATO is not an aggressive alliance. It will only fight to defend its own territory and the members that belong to it. The Western countries are supporting, particularly the EU and America, to varying degree currently in terms of consistency, but still to the tune of billions of dollars, supporting Ukraine in the fight for the right reasons as members of the United Nations and the network of nations. But NATO is firmly not in conflict with Russia, and what we're trying to do is rearm in order to deter Russia from thinking that he can have a go, because Putin, like all bullies, does what he can get away with. So he invaded Ukraine because all his troops told him, and he was under the impression, and he convinced himself that it was going to succeed in a matter of weeks. It was going to be, blitzkrieg, and the Ukrainian state was rotten and would fall. And of course, that plan has not worked out for him. So we've got to rearm and be ready to fight so that we don't have to fight. It's the essence of deterrence. It's worked for 80 years in Western Europe against the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, and that's what we've got to do now very seriously. Otherwise, we're going to find out the true cost of rearming after a war starts, which is what the Ukrainians discovered, and is not a pleasant experience.
No, and the confidence in whether Article 5 would be triggered to defend a country, we used to be certain it would happen. Now with the Don, we're not sure whether people will be there or not. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, no question that NATO's received a wake-up call. And of course, elements of what President Trump says are absolutely right, and it's not a new issue. Eisenhower, who was the first Supreme Allied Commander and then President of the United States, in the 50s was on record as saying that he was fed up with Americans paying the bulk of what goes towards NATO. I think just a couple of angles on that. I mean, I think President Trump probably believes that NATO is a European organization that's there to defend the mainland of Europe from a Russian threat, and the Americans come over to help. Let's not forget that the continental US is part of NATO, and the Atlantic is part of SACEUR's area of operations. And every day since 1949, British, Norwegian, French navies and air forces have been patrolling the Atlantic, helping keep the eastern seaboard of the US safe from threat. So it's not the case that it's just something that the Europeans get that the Americans are paying for. We're all kept in it. And as you well know, the only country that's ever invoked Article 5, the Mutual Defence Pact of the Washington Treaty, is the United States of America, which then led to us all going to Afghanistan for endless tours. So I think he's right to jazz us up on that. If you read not that I recommend you do, I've read it, so you don't have to, the US National Defense Strategy, which followed the National Security Strategy, which came out around Christmas time. The NDS came out last weekend, and it's much clearer than the security strategy. Again, you don't have to like everything in it, and it does foretell an uncertain world of spheres of influence and power politics in a slightly unpleasant way that we in the West don't like. But it does double down on NATO, and it says America is committed to NATO. It's a part of NATO. It supports NATO. It wants its European partners to do more. It accepts, quite rightly, that over the years the Americans have actually, in many cases, wanted to lead and dominate Europe, and in many cases didn't want the Europeans developing their own capabilities because they wanted to be the top dog. So it even takes some, um, blame for that, but makes it quite clear we need to step up. But it says we're committed to NATO, we're committed to the alliance, and we're committed to supporting our European allies and helping them improve their parlous situation. So, I take some comfort from that. It's written down in the National Defence Strategy, along with some other slightly more surprising things. Then I think we've just done it. The best way to keep the Americans in the alliance now is to do what President Trump says and keep arming. Not because President Trump says it, because that's the way to defend ourselves against Russia and keep the alliance strong.
Yeah, and you're working with and know a lot of different defence organisations and businesses, as well as NATO well. Give us a more positive angle, because it's very easy for the press and everybody else just to run NATO down, and we haven't got the kit, and we haven't got the people, and we've given it all to the Ukraine, and we've thinned ourselves, hollowed ourselves out. What are you encouraged by? And what would you encourage to continue to be doing that you see the UK doing and our NATO allies, particularly our European allies, doing that encourages you?
So I think overall, what encourages me is that we can definitely do this. So even if you assume the Americans weren't on board, which again I don't think is a safe assumption, but if you just took the Western European powers and Canada, our economy, or the EU's economy, is 12 times bigger than Russia's. We spend 4 times more on defence now than Russia does. We've got 4 times the population, in Europe than Russia does. So on every metric, particularly if you look at the Russian economy, which is finally beginning to show the strains of 4 years of forced wartime economy and oil prices and gas being suppressed and sanctions beginning to bite, inflation at 30%, etc., etc. There's absolutely no reason why we couldn't do this. I can't remember. I think it might have been Donald Tusk who said, "Why is it that 500 million Europeans need 300 million Americans to help them defeat 140 million Russians?" So, we should be absolutely confident that if it came to it, and it's about messaging that, billions of dollars and euros of money is being put forward in Europe. The Poles, the Germans. I spent a lot of time in the Nordics, the Finns, the Norwegians, the Baltic states, all genuinely stepping up and spending money. So there's every reason to be confident that we can create a defensive alliance, and we have a tactical plan in NATO now, which we haven't had for generations. We've now got a very good war fighting plan, which covers the whole of the alliance's frontage, and we're now resourcing against that plan without going into details, obviously. So those are all reasons to be absolutely confident that we can do this. Ironically, the bit that makes me nervous is UK's commitment to spending. We've got a very good defence review last year. It lays out very clearly, it's a very good bit of analysis, lays out very clearly what's required. The government have undertaken to reach 2.5% by 2027, and then, like everybody else in NATO, 3.5% by 2035, which may be too late if the clock starts ticking on the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine. But at the moment, we're not seeing any clear pathway to achieving that defence. And right now, in defence, as the Chief of Defence Staff was saying in public the other day, we don't have enough money to run what we've got now, never mind a clear growth path of financial investment to get us to where we need to be. And those are political choices. I think the government, I know John Healey and I'm sure the Prime Minister absolutely understand it. They absolutely understand the threat, but they make a political choice because there are other, in their view, more pressing demands. And those pressing demands are always more pressing until the point where deterrence fails and we end up in a war and wish that we had done it. But at the moment in UK, unlike many other nations, the narrative doesn't match the action. So we're leading the coalition of willing. We're a moral leader in NATO. We're standing up to President Trump over Greenland. That's worked. Well done, NATO. Good stuff. But we're not backing it up with the investment required to get our forces to where they need to be compared to our European allies.
And we've been lucky on the podcast to have the Minister for the Armed Forces, Al Khan's, on, and also the Minister for Security, Dan Jarvis, both of who served. How are you getting your head around what's going on with those soldiers who served in Northern Ireland, particularly in operations against the IRA? What is the facts versus the fear, and what's going on? What do you understand to be the actual facts about what's happening?
Well, I'm not an expert like Al Khan's, who's been very vocal on it, which is good. I think we're just aghast that after all of these years, this government has reattacked the issue and purported to bring in legislation which they say will fix it. But I don't think anybody, from our side of the house really believes that. And I think it actually holds a lot more jeopardy for veterans who found themselves in that position. And it's disheartening and utterly wearing for those veterans who've with the best will in the world, in good faith, have done. No one's saying that if you deliberately committed a crime or used violence in a way that you shouldn't have done illegally, that's acceptable. We've seen the appalling behaviour of the ICE agents in Minneapolis. I mean, that's so interesting. If you spent, like we've done, years training soldiers and taking them to difficult non-war fighting situations like Northern Ireland, where they're being spat at, bottled, glassed, abused, and occasionally shot at and blown up. They've got lethal force and they're absolutely disciplined about not using it, compared to the ill discipline of the ICE agents. So no one's saying that crime shouldn't be investigated, but to sort of have a class action against the military for things that happened years ago, when the other side are not being treated with the same approach, is, I think, what people find difficult. And the chiefs, or a bunch of retired chiefs and generals, wrote a very good letter to the newspaper a few weeks ago, laying out that concern. And the concern really is that soldiers will put up with anything as long as they feel like the chain of command have got their back, and don't necessarily need parades and heroic parties and all the rest of it, but we don't expect to be then hounded by our own legislature when we come back.
Yeah, and of course, two things come to mind. One is that the ministers themselves, who instructed members of the armed forces to go and attack and prevent IRA attacks and ended up shooting IRA people, those ministers are not going to be put in the docks, but the soldiers who followed their instructions are. And secondly, it's very personal for me, because a couple of my friends who served with Special Forces in Northern Ireland are now suffering from PTSD years later, because they think they're about to go to jail for actions they followed, doing the right thing under orders, to attack and take out an IRA active service unit who was trying to blow up, or was in the process of blowing up and killing people. And so it just seems a very tough time. So there's a lot there, but we'll leave that one for now. Come back to, in our final 15 minutes, Nick, a bit about you, really. We've talked about leadership. This is an Inspired Leadership podcast. We do like sort of origin stories, personal stories. Pivotal moment. What's a moment that changed how you lead, you show up, or you live today? Can be personal or professional, but everybody loves an origin story. So tell us a bit about what's influenced you.
I think if I look back, I'm not sure. As a young officer, I thought about leadership that much. And in those days, we didn't study it as much as we do now. The assumption was, particularly an army assumption, the RAF were much better at it, and sort of studied it as a formal academic subject. I think we just expected to get thrown to our troops, do the right thing, remember what we got taught at Sandhurst, and hope it would all work out. And in some cases it did, and then sometimes cases it didn't. But I think the first time I sat down and actually with a pencil and a piece of paper and thought, right, I'm going to think about my approach to leadership based on what I learned, is probably age 30, when I went to command my rifle company in the battalion. And I thought about what I learned about leadership and how I wanted to do it and what the sort of tenets were. And like everybody, I came up with three things. Jocks can remember three things, and then you can keep hammering it home. And those things were being operationally ready, disciplined, very important for Scottish soldiers, and thirdly, happy and motivated. And I think it's just said happy. And, that's where I discovered, and, I had a pretty demanding company tour. We were in Cyprus. The jocks had to put up with a lot, appalling accommodation, endless boring hours of guarding RAF bases, with sort of poor infrastructure. They weren't allowed to do anything or go anywhere. And then we did various tours of Iraq, which was sort of highlight, and occasionally field firing in the desert. But I found it required bringing those 100 young soldiers with all their personal problems and all the rest of it, absolutely through life together. And what I found is, by not trying to be too dictatorial and actually just being honest and being yourself, and a little bit humble and quite happy to sort of reveal your own shortcomings, so the jocks really got to know you. And that really brought a team together. And the jocks sort of knew that I had their back, and were trying to get people to do soldiering, and it sort of set me off on a mission. And ironically, those 3 points, I then, every time I then was lucky, and I was lucky to keep commanding things amazingly to the end of my career, every time I sat down to think about it, and it's a great exercise, I think, whatever you're running, whether you're running a company or a charity or a combat infantry division, is to sit down with a bit of paper and write down, as the leader, what you think the important things are, what you're trying to achieve, and what you expect from your people. You don't have to give it to them. You might want to brief them on it, or you might want to issue it to everybody. Jocks never read any given, so it was, we always used to just brief them verbally. But I think having those 3 things, just ironically, every time I thought about it, they remained constant. And what I found was that my approach to leadership, the mission I was on during my army career, was to demonstrate that you could achieve operational excellence, and I was lucky to command some operationally very swept up organisations, but still make sure that everybody enjoyed it and had a good time at the same time. The 2 things were not antithetical. You didn't have to make everyone's life a misery in order to train a successful airborne brigade. Actually, everyone can have fun while doing it. And I discovered magic information that actually, the more the soldiers enjoyed soldiering, the less often they went AWOL, and the better they actually did it. And we achieved more. And it was a kind of revelation at that point that I really just kept on building right to the end.
Really, really useful. And I'm always interested in unseen challenges that leaders have faced. So people look at you, Nick, and they go, gilded life, everything's gone like a dream. He's gone from platoon commander to corps commander, easy life. But what's something you had to overcome or unlearn that others might not see about you from the outside?
God, that is a difficult question. I think things always go wrong. I think part of the trick, and probably what I learned over time, was not to worry too much when they did. And the other thing, if I look back at a sort of young Borton, probably overly anxious about one's career and overly nervous about things going wrong. And then as you develop over time in your own confidence and your own leadership style, you kind of get past that and think, well, get promoted or go on my own merits, and great. And if it doesn't work out, then that's fine. But I am what I am, and I'm going to stick with it. I remember a moment when I thought I made an interesting lesson, actually. So we were on a battalion exercise as a company commander. We were in the jungle, and we had to do a particular tactical serial as part of the exercise. It was all supervised by brigade. Commanding officer was flapping like a budgie, and we were meant to do a river crossing. And I had been in the jungle a lot and had experience, and looked at this raging torrent, because jungle rivers, overnight rain, and so there's no way I was going to safely get all my jocks, who were all appalling swimmers, across this river without losing anybody. We were on exercise, and I said to the young safety officer, young engineer officer, I said, "We're not doing it. I can tell you now, it's just too dangerous for the exercise." And the commanding officer was furious and said, "Oh, can't, I'm not sure I can back you up on this one, Nick. The brigade commander's not happy." I thought, okay, fine. Well, all my soldiers are alive. That's the thing that matters. And I thought that's probably my career over. And I just sort of made my peace with it, in a sort of quiet moment in a jungle pool, and thought, stuff it. Oh, well, I'll just be a passed over mage for the rest of my life. It's a perfectly valid activity to do, and I'll probably have a lot more fun and get more sailing in as a result. Anyway, it all worked out fine. But the point was, you see those commanders who, when things go wrong, throw their people under the bus. Roll forward to Helmand years later, I got in another pickle with the media, without boring you with the details, but was sort of misquoted all over the media as saying something very critical about the government and the army, all completely unfairly, I might point out. And the brigade commander, who was a chap called Mark Carlton Smith, totally top covered me and took all the flak and absolutely protected me and let me get on with commanding my battalion. And he could have thrown me under the bus easily, and I'd have been gone. But that man protected me, took all the flak himself, defended me, and just let me get on with looking after my jocks and doing things. It was such an interesting disparity in leadership styles. But I think just try not to worry. I think there's a kind of overall lesson in life, and
I think
keep holding your nerve and be calm.
I think it's a really good one, because when people set out in their career and try and propel themselves forwards, they can be over anxious overachievers. And I know I was, like, how do you get on? What do you have to do? Trying too hard at times. And I think you could always look back, and I wish I'd given myself advice just to chill out a bit, just don't get so worried about things. It'll all happen. I now find both Stoic and Buddhist philosophy is very helpful, particularly now with 4 children and about to have 5 grandchildren. When problems happen, I was talking to my daughter on my run this morning, and she was explaining how the various things were going on, and I was able just to listen, empathize, agree with her, and then non-attachment to, you'll be fine, you'll be absolutely fine, and in 2 years' time you'll look back at this and go, why did I worry about it? But at the time it seems right in your face.
Keeping things in context is very important.
I think so. How important will this be in 10 weeks' time, 10 months' time, 10 years' time? But at the time, it seems really important. We're close to the end here, Nick, but I mean, there's many things we could talk about: resilience, well-being, leaving a legacy, anything that you particularly want to highlight for people listening to this Inspiring Leadership podcast in 126 countries around the world, with all the experience you've had. What's your few tips that you share? We're going to do a top tip at the end, your top leadership tip. We'll save that. But just anything from what's going on in the world, business leaders, they're CEOs, they're leading their businesses. What sort of wisdom and experience would you share, maybe from mistakes you've made or you've seen others make?
I think, in general terms, we live in an increasingly technological world, and it doesn't matter if you work in defence or anything else. I think we're on a sort of irredeemable, path to full autonomy, certainly on the battlefield in decades to come, and in life generally. And through all of that, and again, leaders have to be much more technologically able than perhaps they were, certainly, in my day in the army. But underpinning all of that is the people. And leadership is fundamentally a human activity. Management's about things, leadership is about people. And so for all the technological stuff going on, or all the, company accounts and finances and technological issues, and making sure your cyber details are all up to date, ultimately it's about making sure your people are well looked after. And I truly believe that you can deliver excellence in any area if you make your intent clear as a leader, and then you prepare your people and train them and equip them with what they need, and then bring them with you, and also trust and empower them to do what they want to do, and take a bit of risk on that, because people have enormous capacity if you just give them their head. And nothing's more disempowering, particularly for the young people that we're privileged to have working for us in all of our endeavours these days, not to be trusted or given. They're all much more talented and brighter than we are. So, we should be empowering them and leading them on. And I think as a leader, it doesn't matter if you're a CEO or a general, is having the confidence to know what skills got you to that point, and then not feeling that you've got to constantly demonstrate them in order to assert your authority or your moral leadership position over everybody. Very interesting, you see leaders who constantly have to be right, don't like being corrected in public. I see this all the time around NATO, particularly with other armies. Whereas I think actually we're quite good at taking frank advice from junior people to say, guess what? So we think your plan's rubbish. Good, thank you for the feedback. What do you suggest? And that's worked for me on numerous occasions over the years. Bit of frank feedback, normally from a young fusilier, telling you that he's got a much better plan, and he might well do. And on occasion we did it, and it worked. So I think having the confidence in yourself as a leader to know what got you there, and then not to feel like you've always got to be right. There's nothing wrong with people saying, "Excuse me, sir, I think that's wrong." and it's an indication of lack of confidence or um, technical ability if people are always desperate to be proved right and terrified of being proved wrong. I think so many people who couldn't stand being told wrong they were wrong, as they went through, and I think that's key.
I think you're so right, and I love that fact, and it fits with my own experience in business and the military that when leaders have the courage to show their appropriate vulnerability, you know they're an inspiring leader and you will follow them. But the weak ones feel they have to be the age of the strong man. We're seeing this with all the different autocratic leaders that are
Absolutely.
coming to the fore and people are voting for them. They're putting them in power at a time when there's uncertainty. They think they want a strong man. Big mistake, but that's what they're doing. And the counter to that is the 10 words, three phrases that my friend Jeff Nishwich taught me from America, which is, I was wrong, I don't know, and I need some help. And those three, if you can say those, not all the time, clearly, because otherwise you begin to doubt they should be there. But if you have the courage to do that, like, as I say, General Rupert Smith, when he was Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe in NATO, which you were a great experience in, he told me this story that he went into one of the briefing rooms and they came, oh, the general's here, general, you know, and he sat at the back, put his feet up on the chairs in front of him, goes, right, guys, what's going on? General, what do you think we should do about this? He goes, guys, I haven't got a clue. That's why I pay you to do it. What do you think? Oh, all right, okay.
It's a great. I say this often to people. My latter career, you get there, and they just assume as you arrive as the divisional commander that you're some operational, legend. I say, guys, I've got a shocking revelation to share with you. I've never commanded a division before. This is my first. I don't know everything, and so the complexity of the modern leadership environment, whether you're running a tech company or a formation in the army, is now so complex, and there's so much data, so many data points, and so much technological complexity that no one person, it's not like World War II where you can be in the turret of your tank with your binos and be the master of the battlefield. It's just too complicated and difficult for one person to do all that. So what I say to people is, instead of the point where you get confronted with a problem or you get given a set of orders, instead of saying, right, men, what I want to do is this, not least because now it's not all men, what you want to do is say to them, what should we do about this? And that should be the leader's first response is, what should we do about this?
Yeah, good. It's that curiosity, that openness to learning and never being the finished product. So we're now beautifully at the end, perfect to time, Nick. And I know you have a busy meeting you have to go on to. Would you please say who you are, what you're doing now, what you've done before, and leave us with your practical top leadership tip?
Sure. I'm Nick Borton. I was a professional soldier for most of my life, and now I work with companies and with the NATO Alliance to try and add back based on my long experience of leadership in high positions and help companies to prepare themselves to make sure that as a nation and as an alliance, we continue to remain safe in a difficult and uncertain world. And I think after long and happy experience, the two key tips that I would give any leader, particularly young aspiring leaders who are developing, is first of all, if you go into work with a spring in your step, evidently enjoying your job, enjoying your leadership role, enjoying your command, then the people around you who work for you will see that and they will enjoy it too, and they will respond, and you will get a better support from them, a better result, because they're all enjoying it because they can see you enjoying it. So be a dealer in hope and have a spring in your step. And the second linked point is, if your people know that you will always put them first, there's nothing that they won't do for you, and there's nowhere that they won't follow you. And that was my experience.
Wonderful. Well, Lieutenant General Sir Nick Borton, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. Thank you very much indeed. And I wish you every success in helping us and helping those different businesses as we navigate ourselves through turbulent times.
Great to talk to you, Jonathan. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you very much.